Hey YouTube, what's up? Thanks for tuning in. Welcome to a further episode of my WPL C34 Toyota Landcruiser FJ40 build and upgrade series. And today I want to talk about axle housings, as already several times announced. But before we take a close look on the C34 axle housings, making problems for many builders including me, a short announcement. Those are the plastic link holders that come with a C34 set. Nearly everything's metal, but those link holders sitting here on the axles are made out of plastic, and as you have seen in my first video, I did already break one here at this position, and I did already see a further video on YouTube. The YouTuber broke one too, so that's for sure the weakest point of the C34. And some days ago, finally, metal upgrades for this have been released. I did already order them from Banggood. They are not really expensive, and you can buy them in black or silver. Who wants silver or gold? I don't know what is gold for, a shake edition or whatever. Anyway, so this is available in metal now. The metal kit, the KM kit, should already come with metal link holders, but it does not. So if you're interested, you can buy them now and probably won't have those problems anymore as I had and several further pilots did already have. What's the problem with the axle housings coming with the C34? Front axle housing, and that's the back axle housing, the red axle housing cover, and they are really hard to close. There's always a slit. They do not really fit properly to mount those brake discs on the back axle or on the rear axle. It's a kind of impossible without using, I don't know, you would have to use a hammer. I won't do this. I complained already in my first video about this, and in my C34 I do not use the original C34 axle housings. I use those beautifully made full metal axle housings. They fit perfectly and they look fantastic. I saw several videos on YouTube about the C34, for example from YouTuber RC Journey, really nice videos, and those guys seemed not to have any problems with the C34 axle housings, what was really a surprise for me, because it's impossible to mount my axle housings properly. So I tried around a little bit, made a little bit of sanding and wiggling and changing the axle housing covers from front to rear, and finally I was able to mount the axle housings, not the brake discs. With more sanding it should maybe even work better. You still see here there's a big slit and not perfect, and I thought, what's the problem? And I finally found the big problem, in my opinion, is the paint. Those axle housings come with a thick cover of paint. This ugly red paint of the axle housings covers I do not like anyway, and a lot of black paint in the axle housings and in the back covers. I received the metal axle housings for the MN90, D90 Land Rover and the MN45 Landcruiser FJ45 last week, also from Banggood. They are here, and those also did come with those ugly red axle housing covers, even front and rear. And I removed the paint. What was a hell lot of work. There are many methods, you know, but it's difficult anyway, and painted them black. And so I intend to do this with the red axle housing covers of the C34 axles anyway, but I'm in the mood of removing paint, a lot of work, and painting, and I thought I won't start sanding and trying to fit the axle housings. I will try to remove all the paint of the axle housings and to paint them in matte black. So I hope I will be able to do this. This will be a lot of work, but if the axle housings are without paint, if the paint has been removed, I can check if they fit perfectly without paint. I highly assume that those thick layers of red and black paint are the reason for the problems so many people have. If this works, I can use my C34 axle housings in my C34 or in any other car. I want to use those beautiful axle housings anyway. They are really beautiful. They are matte black and they are perfect. So I don't know why not to use them. I think they look much better than the WPL axle housings. And what you see here, they come as the MN90 axle housings come with those silver Phillips head screws. They are ugly, really ugly. I don't want to use them, and they are M2, so you could easily replace them by M2 hex screws. So this is a socket head and this is a button head, and I did this, and this looks much better. I don't know if I will use socket head or button head. Here you can see M2 socket head screws on the rear axle housings, and here you can see button head screws. Anyway, they work, they look beautiful, they look much better than the silver Phillips head screws too. And I will use those screws or this type of screws also in the MN90, MN45 axle housings, of course. But it's difficult to do this in the C34 axle housings. What's the difference? They also do come with Phillips head screws, as you can see here, but they are a little bit different. They are kind of grayish, but they are not beautiful anyway. But the difference is, here you can see that's the screw, or one of the Phillips head screws of the C34 axle housing covers. It's significantly thicker. It's an M2.5 screw. So what's the problem with an M2.5 screw? Normally you would say it's better, it's thicker. Okay, it is. And of course I do also have M2.5 hex screws, button head and socket head, and I could use those in the axle housing covers of the C34. Could I? The problem is it doesn't work. This Phillips head screw does have such a small head, and there's only a very limited amount of space or room for the screw head, and neither the button heads nor the socket heads will fit. I will try to make them fit, because I will remove the paint of those axle housing covers anyway, and so I will sand them. I will also try to remove the WPL logo. Really, I don't like or need a WPL logo on metal axle housing covers. Nothing against WPL, but what's that? And I will try to, if the paint has been removed, maybe it will be possible to use those M2.5 socket head or button head hex screws for the axle housing covers. They look, in my opinion, would look much better than those Phillips head screws. And here a closer look to the axle housings I use now in my C34. Those beautiful matte black axle housings with beautiful axle housing covers. And if you take a look inside, I would say those axle housing covers, they are perfect. They close perfectly, and they are also not expensive. So I did already order a second pair because I like them so much. There's only one strange thing in those axle housings. Other than that, I would name them perfect. And if you take a closer look here, the ball bearings inside, they do not have a stop. So the axle housing does not have a stop position or a kind of half shim inside to stop the ball bearing from moving in lateral position. So I don't know if that's not evident, if the housings are closed anymore, and if it's a problem anywhere. I don't know if it is a problem. Probably they won't move if the housings are closed. But I wanted to show you this because I recommend those axle housings highly. I really recommend them. I think they look much better than all other axle housing types I have in metal axle housing types for WPL and similar trucks I've seen so far. But this is strange part. Maybe it's not important at all, maybe it is, but if you should buy those beautiful axle housings, because I told you in this video they are so nice, then you should know this. If that's a problem for you, don't buy them. So far I didn't have any problem. WPL gave us some shims for shimming the axles and adapting the axles, and adapting those axle shafts to the axles is always a little bit of work and a little bit of trial and error, and sometimes you have to use more shims or less. In lateral position, that could be anyway a problem with those brake discs, and it's always a little bit of trial and error. And I wanted to give you a tip. So you can use shims, of course, but you can also use different ball bearings. All the WPL ball bearings that come with the set and with all the other axle sets for the for different types of axles and upgrades are 6 mm in diameter, 3 mm in inner diameter on this position, of course, because this shaft has 3 mm, and only 2 mm height. And there are also ball bearings with the same dimensions but with 2.5 mm. And you see, so those are aftermarket ball bearings. Here on this axle, on the outer side, I used those 2.5 mm height ball bearings, and so I don't have to use a lot of shims there. In the inner part, you probably cannot use those 2.5 mm ball bearings because they won't fit inside the axle housing. If you would not use those axle housings I showed you, which don't have a stop. But normally here's a stop. I should open a further axle. So I will show you this now on the axle of the metal axle of the MN90. Normally here's a stop, so you will not be able to use the 2.5 mm ball bearings here, but on the outer side, if you need, instead of using a lot of shims, you can also buy, or maybe you have them at home. I did have them at home from some micro heelers or whatever. You can also buy or get or use bearings with 6 mm outer diameter, 3 mm inner diameter, and 2.5 mm. So you will save half of a millimeter of shims. It's quite good if you have a lot of this stuff here to try, because as we all know, this WPL and MN and JJRC truck stuff mostly does not work perfectly without a little bit of modifying. So guys, finally removed the paint, and I tell you, this was a lot of work, but as you can see here now, everything is fitting perfectly now, so no problem at all. By the way, I also removed the WPL logo by sanding it, and now everything fits and closes perfectly. Even those brake discs, no problem at all anymore. But removing the paint it's a little bit of work. Removing the black paint from the axles was not that much of work. Anyway, I didn't remove it totally from the covers because I will paint them in black anyway. But the paint was diluted by what we call acetone, so you use for removing paint, and also by alcohol. So I put them in those solutions for some time and then removed the paint. But unfortunately, the paint was not the reason for the M2.5 button head and socket head screws. The hex screws I have not to fit. So even after removing the paint, the button head screws are a little bit too large to fit, and the socket head screws far too large. So far we are stuck to and have to use those Phillips head screws that come with the C34. They are at least not silver. Will the camera zoom in? Anyway, I would prefer the black hex screws, but I will paint the Phillips screws in black and hope not to lose such a screw. Maybe sanding. I will try. Maybe I could sand the button head screws a little bit and they will fit. Strange as it is, this is the axle of the axle housing, the metal axle housing for the MN90 D90 that has been released recently, and the black of this axle housing was not touched by the solutions I used. While there was no effect on the black of the MN90 D90 metal axle housings, there was a big effect on the black of the WPL C34 axle housings. Anyway, I guess this is the solution for all of the problems many of us have. So the color, the thick layers of color are the reason for the problems people have. What was very strange is the red. The red on the axle housing covers. Acetone and alcohol and brake fluid didn't have any effect on it. And when I removed it, it was kind of rubberish, like plastic dip or whatever. So it was quite a lot of work to remove it, but you could peel it off like a skin. I mostly scratched it off with some blades and forceps. That's also totally different to the red of the axle housing covers of the MN90 metal axle housings. And guys, because WPL tells us those C34KM kits are so expensive to make, I'm filming this video on Tuesday now, and yesterday Banggood has released this front metal axle housing also with WPL logo and including the steering knuckles, which are those from the C34. So only steering knuckles and axle housings for an unbelievably cheap price. It's $7 or something, and you can use some points or coupons, so it will be $5 to $6 for the metal axle housing including steering knuckles only for the front. And you can buy them in black or in silver. Probably I did already order two, one in black and one in silver, and hopefully the silver one are without any paint, so you won't have those problems resulting from the thick layers of paint. Only the axle housing covers are red, even in the silver version, so probably that's the same axle housing as we received with the C34. And today, Tuesday, has been released a 6 version, so you get for, I guess it's for $16 or something, but you can use some points or coupons. You get 3 axles, a center axle, a front axle and a rear axle, and center and rear axle do have those brake discs, and the front axle comes with the steering knuckles for 16 or 17 bucks, unbelievably cheap. And I guess that's the same axle housing as we see here in the C34, because the axle housing covers show this WPL logo. I sent it from my axle housing covers. I did see this yesterday and ordered 2 sets only of front axle housing covers, including the steering knuckles. So because if you order the universal joint steerings, you will need steering knuckles, and that's a very cheap way to get them. So if you use some points or coupons, you will get the front axle including steering knuckles for 6 or even less than $6, and you will get 3 axles, a rear axle, a center axle. The center axle does come with 2 open diff covers, and the rear axle does come with 1 open diff cover, and for the shaft, and with one of those axle housing or differential covers in red, unfortunately. I would suggest to order the silver version, because the silver version probably does come without paint, only with a thick red paint that's quite easy to remove. And I would recommend to anyone who has problems with his axle housings of the WPL C34 to remove the paint, and probably this will solve his problems. I will paint those axle housing covers now in black, but I won't paint this area for sure not, and the inside of the axle housing covers, and in the rear axle I won't paint the area where those brake discs have to be pushed on. And you can see how this works now. No problem, no problem. I don't know what WPL did with the paint. If you inspect the red paint of the axle housing covers, you will see how thick this is. And if you want to buy the spare axle housing covers, so the front axle housing cover including the steering knuckles, or the 6x6 set with a center axle, a rear axle, a front axle, steering knuckles for the front axle, and 4 of those brake discs, I probably would recommend to buy the version that's silver. So hopefully this version is unpainted, only the diff covers are painted in red, and they should make much less problems. So I did paint the axle houses in black now, but only the parts that are outside. So I assembled the axle housings and painted it in. So you see there's no paint where the brake discs will be, there's no paint inside of the brake discs, and most important, there's no paint inside of the axle housing covers and on the knobs, on the small pins, and there is also no paint here on where the axle housing covers will sit. So I hope this will solve my problems. Of course it solves my problems, I did already test it, and furthermore I used M2.5 hex screws, button head screws, and it was quite easy to sand the button heads to make them smaller to fit. So see now how easy it is to assemble those axle housings. Everything fits now, no problem with the thick paint that makes it difficult to assemble the brake discs, or however those discs are called. Easy to assemble, easy to mount, and the covers easy fit, and also easy fit on the front side. So this solved my problems. I guess I can mount my WPL C34 axle housings now and see if everything works. Front axle, of course in front of camera it will not work very well. Problems. So those are my axle housings now. No WPL logo, and I will assemble them now and see if everything works. Assembled the axles, and yeah, everything fits now. Of course, the same problems as always when adjusting the gears. That's always a little bit of work, but anyway, now everything fits perfectly, and those axles in black, they look much better than with the red diff cover. I don't know what you think. The brake discs fit perfectly now, they sit firmly but are easy to remove. And so that's my advice for you. If you have the same problems, if you have similar problems as I had, I was not able to mount the axle housings of my WPL C34KM as I found now. The paint was the reason for the problems. So my advice is, if you have problems mounting and fitting the axle housings, first try to remove the paint, at least inside in the areas where the different metal parts touch, and this should give a huge improvement. Or if you want to go a different way, and I guess I still will do this, buy those beautiful, I think they are really more beautiful axle housings, and use those instead of the original WPL C34 axle housings of the metal edition. But anyway, I hope I could help you. Try to remove the paint, probably everything will work. Thanks for watching, guys. See you in the next video.